So let's talk neural machine translation at Unbabel. Just a moment ago, you said that it is the combination of NMT and people that keeps you a few years ahead of your competition. But if you zoom into neural machine translation, what is the secret sauce of Unbabel? What makes the technology really unique? Is it the algorithms, the models, the more data? What is going to really keep it ahead of its competition?
Okay, I can start. I think that, first of all, I don't think that neural machine translation is a secret sauce. I think like what we managed to do at Unbabel is to set up a pipeline of different pieces that orchestrate well together. Neural machine translation, everyone is using the same models. So one thing is the data that we have that Vasco mentioned on customer service. So it's basically, we have a very powerful data set in the rich get richer. It's the quality estimation that plays a big role. It's all the pipeline of how do you actually take care of the text and identify this particular like name entities that need to be taken care. So there's all this kind of like piece that is what makes the advantage. I would say that neural machine translation, the models, everybody has the same. Like there's no company that has a better model than the other one, and everybody's publishing the latest research on the conference. So we're all playing on the same field. It's more about the data. And another thing that is happening is the disadvantage of machine learning operations. Like, how do you automate all of this? Because if you think that you have one model, not per customer, but per brand of the customer, per language pair, then you start having like this 1,000 models on production. How do you make this feasible? Like, how do you automate all of these parts? For instance, like one topic that it's not very talked about is like data filtering and evaluation. Like, how do you evaluate your models without having to require humans? So MQM is amazing to get like deep insights of the problems, but at this fast pace that you have like 1,000 engines that are constantly being retrained once you have more data, let's say every week, fully automated, you need to say, okay, is this model better? Or was there some problem in training that you just need to stop? And right now the metrics like BLA don't give you that because they cannot distinguish between these models that are really good. So we have our own internal metric. It's going to come out this year on ACL called Comet, which is like a big investment that actually correlates very well with MQM. So there's all of these pieces of AI that makes this work. So if you think that the secret sauce is just MT plus humans, you're missing actually a lot of the things that make the difference.
So that's interesting, Joe. If you say that everybody's using the same models, then to a large extent, the difference is in the data that you use, I suppose.
Yeah, it's the data in the pipeline, the data and the rest of the pieces of the pipeline, not just the data. But it is. If you think about this frameworks, that everybody uses OpenNMT, Marian, TensorFlow, you can name it. There's like 4, and every single company from Google, Amazon,
they're using the same.
Everyone uses the same.
Yeah. So I have a bit of a selfish question then in this regard, because as you know, TAUS is really positioned as the language data network, and we're working very hard on building another layer on top of it, an open data marketplace where everybody in this industry can trade data. What's your take on that? Is that sort of a direction to go?
I mean,
will that give you access to all the right data to build better engines?
So we've used some TAUS data, as you know, we've been part of that network. I do think that if you have data that a lot of people have, you're fine to switch because you're just going for volume. Although one very interesting thing is like now with neural machine translation, quality is much more important than volume. And I think DeepL taught us all a lesson about that. If you have very specialized data on one given domain, you don't want to give it to a centralized repository because you're losing your advantage.
Well, you don't, but there are plenty, I mean, most of the players in the industry are not using the data in the same way as you do, and they can make an extra dime trading your data into a market.
That I agree. We buy data as well.
From a personal perspective, I think what you guys are doing in data exchange is crucial for the advance of the overall field, right? I mean, without, and it's incredibly beneficial, not just to us, but to all the players. And as João said, we've used TAUS data extensively in the past, and it's been amazing. I think one of the other thing that we see, it's even if so the data that we have from our customers obviously is incredibly private and confidential. And for example, one of the things that we put a huge amount of effort is exactly on the security of that data. And so even little things, as Rowan was mentioning in our pipeline, for example, having a state-of-the-art anonymization filter for dealing with enterprise data, it's something that it's not your first thought when you think about a translation pipeline, but is actually incredibly crucial, because anything that goes out to a human that might contain PII data needs to be scrubbed to avoid leaks of information, which we do. And then if you think about machine translation, of course you have customer adapted, so the data itself is important. And then you have quality estimation of how do you know if that's good or not, right? And then you have the task of even things of how do you do tag projection, given that you can have highly complex HTML streams coming in, but you want humans to have a clean source of translation, and MT engines too. And then you have how do you actually allocate the right task to the right person, because that hugely maximizes the ability to have high quality, short turnaround time. And then when someone actually is translating, how do you give them an AI powered CAT tool so that you're vastly increasing the output of a human, and you're actually driving humans to do the things that they're most happy doing and what they can do where the machine can't, right? So it's a number of different pieces. Sure. And what we found is each of them could be an actual startup. That's our internal joke, is Unbabel is not one company, it's actually 10 different companies that are tightly integrated to create a product which is required to be able to do what we do.
Yeah.
So let me actually add one thing to this, because this is really interesting. So one of the things that's been keeping us busy over these last weeks is the anonymization part. It's really important. Customers want it. I don't know of many companies that actually do it on a localization departments, but given that we're doing customer service and working with big enterprise, we have to do it. It's interesting because a lot of times that is easy to do for English. So if you're translating from English to something, you're safe. Now, once like we started a use case we're doing now, you have to do it for Polish, and you have to start identifying Polish names with all the morphology that it has in the text.
Yeah.
That is an interesting challenge, and we have that internally. So one conversation that we always go around Unbabel is, should we start externalizing our services and have some sort of Unbabel cloud where to put all our services available, kind of AWS did. But yes, that's we have a lot of stuff that is keeping us busy. That is one of them.
Hey, let's take a moment to look really into the future now, and what sort of technologies are on the horizon that might be interesting for us to use in applications in the industry. We know that you're a big fan of brain-computer interaction interfaces, Vasco. I remember you started rambling about that on stage at the TAUS conference a few years ago. Are you still thinking about this? And is there a role for this kind of very advanced no, that's literally neuroscience, in our industry?
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. And in fact, we had planned a fairly significant push towards that this year in Unbabel. Given the current crisis and the need to kind of reshift priorities, we're probably going to take that a little bit. It's going to take a little longer to get where we wanted to get. But I do think that we are in that area in the beginning of something that is going to be very transformative for the entire human race. And that's going to have an impact in all the areas. I think that if we go very meta on this, I think one of the biggest issues that we're seeing on the drive towards polarization is a lot of people's inability to keep up with the rate of change and evolution that we're seeing in technology. And for example, one of the things that I see is if there is an effective brain-to-computer interface where you can start using different AI extensions to be able to interpret the world around you, that you'd have elements that will be able to create an abstraction of new things such that you as a human can adapt to new technology seamlessly. And so even the ability of having and increasing the performance and the productivity of a human will extend not only to the specific work that they're doing, but to new areas that are coming. So I think we're probably, I would say, 10 years away from something that is going to be impacting our ability to, the kind of things that I'm talking about. But what we're seeing earlier is, one, for example, I fully expect in the next 2-3 years we'll have much better interfaces for ALS patients, for example, and the ability to start communicating. That's something that affects, unfortunately, quite a number of people in the world. and where, you know, in ALS, where people get locked into their own bodies. And so the ability to communicate is paramount. But also what we're seeing already is, you know, it's taking a little bit beyond, right? I think once you have the ability to interpret or to extend communication through nonverbal, so through directly brain signals, translation is just a layer on top of that, right? And so we're not that far from having, you know, not only we were seeing 3 or 4 years ago, we were seeing neurophotonics, and we're seeing Elon Musk with Neuralink starting to invest in this, but now we're seeing a bunch of startups that are focusing on specific BCI interfaces. There's open source, sophisticated BCI interfaces. You know, there's challenges on EEG scanning, because if you do it on non-invasive, there's a lot of noise. So your skull conducts electricity, and so it's hard to pinpoint locations. But even that, we're actually seeing a lot of improvement with AI itself. So using predictive AI to filter the noise on BCI interfaces. So it's very exciting. We're right in the beginning of this, but it's an area that could have huge impact.
We don't need translation anymore then, because, or are we thinking in our own language? I mean, in the brains, what's happening in the brains? Do we know? We don't.
Well, I think that, so my thesis on this is that actually if we were to really be able to look in detail, we would find that each of us speaks a slightly different language. That when we correlate what we mean by a certain word to the meaning of that word, the meaning is roughly the same when I say car, but if you were actually able to go to what's my internal representation of this token, it's probably slightly, there's an overlap, but not 100% overlap. So
good. So we still need translation somehow.
Yeah, definitely, right? I mean, we need translation of feelings, right?
Right.
If I detect that you're feeling a certain way, you kind of have to translate it for me, right? A lot of times I'll say, hey, it looks like you're happy, and you might not be happy, or like, no, I actually not really, or I'm sad, or I'm not. So even our ability, like what we do a lot of times is translating our thoughts, what we feel, what we think, and that translation like is not going to change, right? I think maybe what's going to happen is right now we have a very slow bandwidth of communication, you know, like the way we project language. But I also think that language is the scaffolding that we use to express thoughts, and they enable us to organize thoughts. And so that scaffolding will still be needed in some way. Even if you can project it directly through digital interfaces, you will be in some form of language.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us today. It was great, very insightful. We didn't expect anything less. So yeah.
If you also want to break down the language barriers for your company and your customers, you need your language data to work for you. TAUS, the Language Data Network, provides data and tools for machine learning and for business intelligence.